I want to be specific about how it happened because the specificity matters and because I've replayed it so many times that I need to put it somewhere outside my own head. She was cold. That's it. That's the whole thing. We were standing in the entryway after getting back from my daughter's school play, and Karen said she was cold and her coat was on the hook by the door, and I grabbed it and held it open for her the way I always did, the automatic gesture of 11 years. And when I lifted it off the hook, something fell out of the pocket and landed on the floor between us. A receipt, folded in quarters, from a restaurant. She reached for it faster than made sense. Not quickly enough. I picked it up. She said my name, just Greg, in a tone I had never heard from her in 11 years of marriage, a tone that told me everything before I'd unfolded the paper far enough to read a single word. My name is Greg. I'm 44. I manage a distribution warehouse on the east side of Akron, Ohio, a facility that processes household goods for a regional retail chain. About 180 employees across 3 shifts, and my job is essentially to make sure that the right things end up in the right place at the right time while dealing with all the ways that human beings and logistics systems conspire to prevent that from happening. I've been in warehouse operations for almost 20 years. I'm good at it. I find genuine satisfaction in the kind of work that most people find invisible, the infrastructure of ordinary life, the systems that keep shelves stocked and orders filled. My coworkers would say I'm steady. My wife used to say I was the most unflappable person she'd ever met. That was before the receipt. Her name is Karen. She's 41, works as a dental hygienist at a practice on West Market Street in Akron, has been there for 9 years, knows most of her patients by name, has the specific quality of someone whose job requires them to be genuinely good with people. She's warm in the way that's not performance. She remembers things about people, their kids' names, their vacation plans from 6 months ago, the thing they mentioned once in passing that they didn't expect anyone to hold on to. It's a quality that made me fall in love with her and that I have been trying to figure out how to think about differently since October. We met in 2012 at a mutual friend's wedding, a rehearsal dinner actually, the kind of event where you're seated with strangers and either spend the whole time making polite small talk or you actually find a person. We found each other. She was funny and direct, and she laughed at something I said before I'd fully finished saying it, which meant she was ahead of me, which meant she was sharp, and I've always found sharpness attractive in a way I can't fully explain. We dated for a year and a half, got married in the spring of 2014 at a small venue outside of Cuyahoga Falls, 70 people, outdoor ceremony that the weather barely cooperated for, and that felt perfect anyway in the way that things feel perfect when the people are right. We have a daughter. Her name is Nora, and she's 9 years old, and she was the one in the school play that night, playing a leaf in what I can only describe as the most ambitious environmental-themed third-grade production I've ever witnessed, which is also the only one I've ever witnessed, but I stand by the assessment. She was magnificent. She was so proud of herself walking off stage, and Karen and I had both been in the front row being the embarrassing parents who take too many photos. And on the drive home, Nora had chattered the entire way about which parts she'd gotten right and which parts she'd messed up on. And it had been, right up until the moment I lifted that coat off the hook, a completely perfect evening. My flaw, and Karen had raised this with me more than once over the years, in the patient way she raised things, is that I manage people at home the same way I manage people at work. I set expectations, I track outcomes, I give feedback when things aren't going right, and I assume everything is fine when they are. I'm not emotionally unavailable in a dramatic sense. I'm just efficient. I don't ask how people are doing when I can observe that they seem fine. I don't initiate difficult conversations when things appear to be running smoothly. Karen had told me, twice in 11 years, that she sometimes felt like she was living in a well-managed household rather than a marriage, and both times I'd heard it, and improved for a while, and then drifted back, because efficiency is a hard habit to break when it's also how you've survived professionally for 20 years. I thought we were in a good stretch. I thought October had been a good month. I was wrong, and I was wrong in the specific way that someone who reads the surface metrics and misses the underlying variance is always wrong. The first thing I noticed was in August. Karen's gym routine had always been consistent. She went 3 mornings a week, early, before Nora was up, back by 7:30. In August, she started going evenings sometimes, after dinner, when previously evenings had been Nora time and house time and the winding down texture of a family evening. She said she'd switched some sessions to evenings because the morning class schedule had changed. That was plausible. Gym schedules change. What I noticed, and processed as a data point without knowing what data set it belonged to, was that she came home from the evening sessions later than the morning ones. Morning sessions were done in 90 minutes, including the drive. Evening sessions were sometimes 2.5 hours. I attributed this to traffic, to the specific inefficiency of evening gym crowds, to the possibility that she was taking longer classes. I attributed it to everything except what it actually was. In September, her phone behavior shifted. I want to be precise about this because it wasn't dramatic. It was the kind of change that you'd only notice if you knew someone well and paid attention, which I did and mostly didn't. She'd always been relaxed about her phone at home, often leaving it in the kitchen while we were in other rooms, answering texts at the dinner table without self-consciousness. In September, the phone started staying with her. Not ostentatiously, just consistently. I noticed it once, and then twice, and then I was noticing it regularly, and each time I registered it as a data point and filed it without drawing a conclusion, because drawing conclusions without sufficient data is something I trained myself not to do professionally and had apparently applied indiscriminately to my personal life. There was a name. His name was Seth Dorado, and he was a personal trainer at the gym Karen used. Early 30s, had been at that particular gym for about 2 years, apparently well-liked by the morning crowd and the evening crowd both. She'd mentioned him in September in the context of having started doing some personal training sessions to work on her running form. She mentioned him a handful of times in September and early October, always in context. Seth had suggested a different approach to her stride. Seth thought her form issue was coming from her hips. Seth this, Seth that. Professional fitness context. I thought nothing of it. In October, the personal training sessions became more frequent. She said she was making real progress on the running form and wanted to keep the momentum going. This was also plausible because Karen had signed up for a half marathon in the spring and had been serious about training for it, which I'd supported and admired. I told her the sessions seemed to be helping. She agreed that they were. We talked about the half marathon training over dinner. None of this seemed wrong. What seemed wrong? And I notice I keep using that word, seemed, because nothing was definitively wrong until it suddenly was a Friday in mid-October when Karen said she was driving down to her mother's in Canton for the day. Her mom is 69, widowed, lives alone, and Karen made the Canton trip every few weeks, sometimes with Nora, sometimes alone. It was a normal part of our calendar. I had no reason to question it. She left at 10 in the morning and came back at 8 in the evening, and she seemed fine, and I asked how her mom was doing, and she said her mom was good, tired, and we watched something on TV and went to bed. Completely normal. I thought nothing of it at the time. But the Friday is important, and I'll come back to it. By late October, I was running the kind of background calculations that I'd been refusing to run for 2 months. The evening gym sessions with their extended timelines. The phone that lived in her pocket now. Seth's name, which had appeared with regularity in September and I know this pattern well by now. I've read enough of these stories since to recognize it. Had quietly stopped appearing in October, as though someone had realized a name was being mentioned too often and made a conscious adjustment. The vanishing of a name from someone's vocabulary is sometimes louder than its presence. I am, as I said, a person who manages complex systems for a living. I track inventory flows, staffing patterns, throughput metrics. I look at data over time and identify when something is trending in a direction it shouldn't be. I'd been applying a deliberate blindness to my own household that I would never have applied to my facility, and by late October I was aware of applying that blindness and choosing it anyway, because the alternative was to look directly at what the data suggested, and I wasn't ready. The specific mundane moment that captures that entire period. I was driving to work on a Tuesday morning in late October, the kind of gray Ohio morning that's not quite raining and not quite not raining. The expressway out to the east side. One of maybe 3,000 identical Tuesday morning commutes I've made over the years. And I was running the numbers in my head the way I'd been doing for weeks. The timeline of the gym changes, the phone behavior, the name that had appeared and been retired. I was building the same case I'd been building and tearing down and building again. Except that morning I let it stand for longer than usual before I knocked it down. I let it stand all the way to the exit ramp, and then I parked in the lot and sat there for 5 minutes before I went inside. And the facilities manager found me staring at nothing from across the lot, and came over and asked if I was okay, and I said yes. Long night. And went in and did my job for 9 hours and came home and asked Karen how her day was, and she said fine. Good. How was mine? And I said the same. That evening I looked up Seth Dorado. Not to find anything in particular. I just wanted a face to attach to the name. He had an Instagram account, public, full of the expected personal trainer content. Workout videos, client testimonials, progress photos, motivational captions. He was 32. He'd grown up in Youngstown, moved to Akron for the job, apparently competed in amateur fitness competitions on the side. Good-looking in the specific way of someone who has made their physical presentation into their professional identity. I looked at his account for about 5 minutes and then closed it and went to bed, and I lay there next to Karen and thought about the gap between what I knew and what I was prepared to do with it. I kept coming back to the same conclusion. I had suspicion and pattern and a trainer's Instagram, and none of that was evidence of anything. I needed something concrete, or I needed to let it go. I didn't have to wait long. The school play was on a Thursday evening in the first week of November. Nora had been rehearsing for 6 weeks. She'd made us practice her lines with her at dinner 3 nights a week and had opinions about her costume that she'd communicated with great precision to Karen, who'd handled all of it with the patience she always had for the things Nora cared about. I'd been looking forward to it. I'm not someone who expresses that kind of thing easily, but I'd genuinely been looking forward to it in the way you look forward to watching your kid do something that matters to them. The play was 45 minutes, and Nora was wonderful, and afterward we took her for ice cream on the way home, even though it was a school night, and even though it was November and the temperature had dropped into the 40s while we were inside. She was buzzing the whole drive home, still in her leaf costume, because she'd refused to take it off. We got back to the house, and Nora went upstairs to change, and Karen shivered in the entryway and said she was cold. Her coat was on the hook. I reached for it. Automatic. The same gesture I'd made 100 times. Lifted it off the hook, held it open. Something fell out of the left pocket. It hit the floor between us with the small, flat sound of folded paper. We both looked at it. She moved for it. I was faster. I picked it up. It was folded into quarters the way you fold something when you're putting it away without thinking about where you're putting it. I unfolded it. A receipt from a restaurant called the Lockkeepers, which I knew was on Canal Road in Cuyahoga Falls. 2 entrees. A bottle of wine. Friday, October 18th. The timestamp was 7:43 p.m. I stood in the entryway holding this receipt and doing the math that took about 4 seconds. October 18th was a Friday. Karen had been in Canton at her mother's on October 18th. She'd left at 10 in the morning and come back at 8 in the evening and told me her mom was tired and they'd had a good day. The Lockkeepers is in Cuyahoga Falls. Cuyahoga Falls is 20 minutes from our house. Canton is 45 minutes in the other direction. She had not been at her mother's. I looked up at Karen. She was looking at the receipt. Her face had gone to something I didn't have a word for. Not quite guilty, not quite afraid. Just completely, suddenly still. Like a system that had just lost power. Greg, she said. Just my name. October 18th, I said. She said nothing. You told me you were in Canton. This is Cuyahoga Falls. Greg, please. 2 entrees, I said. A bottle of wine. I looked at her. Is it Seth? The stillness in her face answered before she did. Yes or no, Karen? Yes. So quiet I felt it more than heard it. I looked at the receipt for another moment. 2 entrees, a bottle of wine, $87.40 including tip, paid at 7:43 p.m. on a Friday when she'd been at her mother's having a quiet day. I folded it back into quarters along its original creases, which was an odd thing to do, and I put it in my own pocket. How long, I said. Greg, how long has this been happening? Since August. She pressed her hand over her mouth. I'm sorry. August. I repeated the word. The gym evening sessions. The phone. The name that had appeared and then been deliberately retired. All the way back to August. I heard Nora's footsteps upstairs, the sound of her moving around in her room, still probably in the leaf costume, humming something. We can't do this right now, I said. I kept my voice very level. It was the thing I was best at, and it had never felt less like a virtue. Nora is upstairs. I know. I need you to go upstairs and put her to bed, and we will talk later. Okay. She was crying now. Quietly, not dramatically. The kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and contained. Karen. She looked at me. Was tonight. I stopped. I had to reorganize the sentence. Were there others? Other times. Not just October 18th. She closed her eyes. Open them. Yes. I nodded. I walked past her into the kitchen, and I stood at the counter, and I heard her go upstairs, and I heard the murmur of her voice reading to Nora, the nightly ritual that had been unchanged for years, and I stood in my kitchen in my coat, and I looked at nothing for a long time. When she came back downstairs, I was sitting at the kitchen table. I'd taken off my coat. I'd made tea I didn't want. The receipt was on the table between us. How many times? I said. Greg, I don't think counting is. How many times? She looked at the table. A lot. Since August. The evening gym sessions. Yes. Not always, but she stopped. Mostly. Does he know you're married? Yes. Is he in a relationship? No. I sat with that for a moment. Single. Mid-30s. Presumably not constrained by the same things that should have constrained Karen. Do you love him? She looked at the table for a long time. I don't know. That's an answer, Karen. I know it is. She looked up at me then, and her eyes were red. I'm not saying it's a good one. Are you in love with him? She stopped. I feel something that she stopped again. I'm so sorry, Greg. I know that's. Are you in love with him? Yes or no? I don't know. Said slowly. Like each word was a door she was opening and closing. I honestly don't know, and I know that makes this worse and not better. Nora's light was still on upstairs. I could see the thin line of it under the door at the top of the stairs. I need you to sleep in the guest room tonight, I said. Okay. And I need to think about what happens next. Okay. She started to say something else. She stopped herself. I picked up my tea. It was cold. I drank it anyway because I needed to do something with my hands. And Karen sat across from me, and we didn't say anything else for a long time. And eventually, she went to the guest room, and I stayed at the table, and I sat there in my coat in my kitchen in Akron, and I thought about the receipt folded into quarters in my pocket, and the evening that had started with Nora in a leaf costume and ended here. I said I'd come back. I'm here. I want to say first that the comments on the original post affected me more than I expected. I'm not someone who talks about personal things. My coworkers would be genuinely surprised to know this post exists, and the experience of having strangers respond to something this private was strange and also more useful than I'd predicted. A few of you said things that I've been carrying around with me, turning over like a stone in a pocket. One person wrote, "The detail about drinking cold tea anyway says everything about how you hold things together even when you shouldn't have to, and I've thought about that more times than is probably healthy." Thank you for that. Here's what happened. Karen has been staying at her mother's, the actual one, in Canton, for the past 12 days. We'd talked about the logistics the morning after the school play night, once Nora was at school, and we'd reached the practical decision that Karen should be the one to go because the house is closer to Nora's school and Nora's routine needed to stay intact as much as possible. Karen agreed without argument. She'd packed what she needed and driven down on a Saturday morning, and I'd stood in the driveway and watched her car go, and then I'd gone back inside and Nora and I had pancakes and watched cartoons, and I'd gotten through the day. Nora knows something is wrong. She's 9, which means she's old enough to read an atmosphere and young enough that we've been able to keep the full scope of it from her. Karen calls her every evening. I put Nora on the phone and go into the other room and listen to their voices from a distance, and I feel approximately 17 different things simultaneously, and then Nora hangs up and asks if she can have a snack, and the evening continues. My daughter is, objectively, one of the more resilient people I know, which is either a credit to how we raised her or a credit to 9-year-olds generally, and I'm choosing to believe the first thing even though I'm not sure I've earned it. I told my brother Patrick. He's 47, lives in Cleveland, and he is the only person in my family I tell real things to, which is not many things over many years. He drove down the weekend after everything happened, and we sat in my garage, and I told him what I knew, and he listened in the way he listens, which is fully and without offering opinions until he's sure you've finished. Then he said, "What do you need right now? Not what do you think you should do, not here's what I would do. Just what do you need?" I said I didn't know. He said that was okay, and he stayed for the rest of the weekend and helped me finish a section of driveway I'd been meaning to repair for 2 years, and that is the most useful thing anyone has done for me in 3 weeks. Karen's mother knows. Karen told her, which took courage I acknowledge even in the middle of everything else. Her mother called me once, carefully, and said she was sorry and that she loved Nora and that she hoped I knew her feelings about me hadn't changed. I thanked her. We haven't spoken since, but the call was the right thing, and she knew it was the right thing, and I respect that. The complication nobody predicted. Seth Dorado no longer works at the gym. I found this out through a third party, a coworker of mine whose wife uses the same gym, who mentioned it in passing about a week after everything came out. I don't know the exact circumstances of his leaving, and I have not gone looking for that information. I've heard conflicting things secondhand, that he resigned, that his contract wasn't renewed, that there may have been an HR situation, and I've made a decision to stop at the edge of what I know rather than going further, because nothing I learn about Seth Dorado's employment situation changes what happened in my marriage, and the energy I'd spend following that thread is energy I need for other things. Karen reached out to me about Seth directly, about 10 days in. She said she had ended things, that she'd done it before she left for Canton, and that it was over. I said I heard her. I didn't say thank you, which is not a thing you say to someone for ending an affair, and I didn't ask for details because I don't think details are what I need right now. She said she understood if I didn't believe her. I said I'd need time to figure out what I believed. Our mutual friends, we have a fairly integrated social world, the kind you build in a mid-sized Midwestern city over 11 years, have responded with the careful silence that people default to when they don't know whose side they're on or whether sides are even the framework. I've told exactly 2 people outside of Patrick, my friend Dave, who's known me since high school and who responded by bringing over a case of beer and saying nothing useful but being present, which was what I needed, and my HR director at work, only in the most general terms, because my mental state has been visible enough that someone needed to know there was a reason for it. She was professional and kind and has not made it weird, which is the thing you want from an HR director when you're briefly and involuntarily transparent about your personal life. The inside of it. The first morning I woke up alone in the house. Nora was at school, Karen was in Canton, and it was a weekday morning, and I had work. I lay there for a moment in the specific silence of a house that usually has more people in it. I know my house's sounds. I know which particular quiet means Nora is asleep and which means she's already up, and I know the sound of Karen moving in the kitchen in the morning, the specific rhythm of it, the coffee machine and the cabinet, and the particular drawer she opens to get the spoon she always uses. All of that was absent, and the absence had a specific texture, and I lay there and let it exist for about 3 minutes before I got up and got ready for work. I found her reading glasses on the nightstand on her side of the bed. The readers she kept there for the middle of the night when she couldn't sleep and wanted to look at her phone without getting up for her contacts. Small, wire-framed, the kind you buy in a drugstore 3-pack. I picked them up and held them for a moment, and then I put them in the drawer of the nightstand, which is where things go when you don't know what to do with them, and I closed the drawer and made the bed. There's a coffee shop on West Market Street that Karen and I used to go to on Saturday mornings before Nora was old enough for the kind of Saturday that involves sleeping in and cartoons. We'd stopped going regularly when Nora arrived, in the way that the pre-kid rituals give way to the kid rituals, and I hadn't thought about it in years. Last Saturday, I drove past it on my way to get groceries, and the sign was the same sign, and the window display was the same, and something about the continuity of it, the thing that had been there the whole time without me thinking about it, caught me in a way I didn't expect, and I sat in the parking lot of the grocery store for a while before I went in. I make coffee for one now. I catch myself reaching for 2 mugs, and I correct it before it happens, most of the time. Last Thursday, I didn't catch it, and I made 2 cups, and I stood at the counter with both of them, and I drank one, and I poured the other one down the sink, slowly, watching the coffee spiral down, and then I rinsed the mug and put it back, and went to work. Nora asked me last week if Mom was coming home soon. I said yes, pretty soon. Mom just needed to spend some time with Grandma. She looked at me with the specific expression of a 9-year-old who knows she's not getting the full story and has decided to accept the partial story for now. Then she asked if she could have my phone to play a game. 9 years old and already more emotionally efficient than most adults I know. Here is where I actually am. Karen and I have spoken 6 times since she went to Canton. For practical conversations. One hard one, about a week ago, where she said things about the marriage, the managed quality of it, the way she'd felt more like a project being well run than a person being loved, that I've been sitting with since. I didn't argue with her account. I don't think she's wrong about the diagnosis, even if I think what she did with it was wrong. And those 2 things exist in the same space, and I'm still figuring out how to hold them both. The 6th conversation was 2 days ago. She asked if I would consider working on the marriage. Not a demand, not a pitch. She asked it carefully, in the way she asks things when she knows the answer might be no and she's prepared to accept that. She said she understood if I couldn't, that she wouldn't pressure me, that whatever I needed she would try to give. I told her I needed more time. That was honest. She said okay. We've left it there for now. I've started seeing a therapist. His name is Dr. Marcus Webb, and he has an office on South Main Street. And he has the specific quality of letting long silences exist without trying to fill them, which turns out to be exactly what I need from someone who is paid to help me talk about things I don't usually talk about. I've been 3 times. I'm going back next week. He said something in the second session that I've been thinking about since, that the question of what to do about the marriage and the question of what to do about myself are 2 separate questions, and that I'd been conflating them, and that separating them might help. I'm working on that. Nora's half-term report came home last week. Excellent across the board. A teacher's note saying she was a joy to have in class, and that her performance in the school play had been exceptional. I read it at the kitchen table, and I felt something that was almost entirely uncomplicated, which was the first uncomplicated feeling I'd had in 3 weeks, and I sat with it for as long as it lasted. I don't know what the marriage is yet. I know what it was. I know what it became without me seeing it clearly enough to understand it in time. What it is now is something I'm not ready to name, and I've decided to give myself permission to not know for a while longer, which does not come naturally to someone who makes his living by knowing the state of things. The receipt is still in my coat pocket. I don't know why I've left it there. I take the coat out every day and I know it's there, and every day I think about taking it out and throwing it away, and every day I put the coat back on the hook and I don't. Maybe that will change tomorrow. Maybe it's just that right now it's the only piece of evidence I have that the last 3 weeks actually happened the way they happened, and there's something in me that isn't ready to fold it up and throw it in the trash, because what I need most right now, more than resolution, more than a decision, more than a plan, is just to know that the things I saw were real and that my reading of them was correct. I read people and systems for a living. I was reading the wrong data for 3 months in my own house, and the receipt in my pocket is how I know I eventually read it right. 11 years of marriage and a leaf costume and cold tea and a folded piece of paper, and I still don't know how the story ends, but I know now that not knowing is something I can survive, which is more than I knew 3 weeks ago. Tomorrow, a man receives a letter at his business address from a woman he's never met, and what she says about his wife makes him go back through 5 years of photographs looking for the truth.